Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Should we eat the rich? Are wealthy people greedy? And where does that belief come from? Should everyone be financially equal and taxed equally too? I answer, are rich people greedy? Today on episode 429 of the GRE podcast. The EQRP system now allows you to shield up to $700,000 of income from taxes every year. My friend Damian Lupo informed me that checkbook IRAs have been made illegal by the U.S. tax court. So if you have a checkbook IRA, your holdings are now disqualified with taxes and penalties up to 50%. But don't panic, Damian and the EQRP team can fix this. This way you can invest your 401k or IRA in real estate, gold, Bitcoin, and even your own business. So whether you're a full-time investor, retired, or even a dentist with dozens of employees, if you're listening, you qualify. The EQRP works. It's the solution. You'll control your retirement money, kill UBIT, and pay way less taxes. I encourage you to learn more about this strategy and free up your retirement money. Get the newest EQRP special report. Text GRE to 307-213-3475. Text GRE to 307-213-3475. Mid-South homebuyers, with over 2 decades as the nation's highest-rated turnkey provider, their empathetic property managers use your return on investment as their North Star. It's no wonder smart investors line up to get their completely renovated income properties like it's the newest iPhone. Headquartered in Memphis with their globally attractive cash flows, Mid-South has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and 4,000 houses renovated. There is zero markup on maintenance, let that sink in, and they average a 98.9% occupancy rate with an industry-leading 3.5-year average renter term. Every home they offer you will have brand new components, a bumper-to-bumper 1-year warranty, new 30-year roofs, and wait for it, a high-quality renter in an astounding price range, $100 to $150K. Get to know Mid-South. Enjoy cash flow from day one at midsouthhomebuyers.com. That's midsouthhomebuyers.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE. From Hartford, Connecticut to Weatherford, Texas, and across 188 nations worldwide, you are back in that abundant place where financially free beats debt-free. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. Welcome to the last show of the year. Are rich people greedy? First, what is the definition of greed? Well, the world's best-known search engine puts the Oxford Dictionary definition at the top. And yeah, I think this is a good definition. It says that greed is an intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or food. All right, that's the definition. And then the example of the use of the word in a sentence is mercenaries who had allowed greed to overtake their principles. That's a sentence fragment there. So, the example really hints that greed is a corruption of sound morals or principles in order to get more for oneself. Greed is not good. Now, for some reason, actors and entertainers can make gigantic salaries and high-flying paydays, even though actors are people that are pretending to be someone else. But people don't seem to resent them as much as they do entrepreneurs or CEOs that make a lot of money. For some reason, the actors and entertainers, they're seen as lovable, and the entrepreneur or the CEO is deemed greedy. I don't know why that is. That might even be backwards. Recently, soccer star Cristiano Ronaldo became the highest paid athlete ever at $200 million per year. Yankee slugger Aaron Judge, $360 million over 9 years. Those athletes entertain others. I personally like watching sports, but I don't know that they're advancing society like the, say, innovation that Steve Jobs brought to Apple. Yet it seems like an entrepreneur is often the one that gets more of the criticism if they obtain wealth. And then there are some bad examples too. I specifically remember a few years ago when Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary criticized cryptocurrency, and then suddenly he seemed to do this 180, and he embraced and endorsed cryptocurrency. And then only later here, just several weeks ago, we learned that Kevin O'Leary accepted $15 million to promote the crypto company FTX that had horrible financial records and was committing fraud. So was O'Leary greedy? And then you and I have to ask ourselves, if you were offered $15 million to do crypto commercials, then would you be incentivized to just say, oh no, let's put that $15 million on hold while I do some due diligence on this company that even has Pro Sports Arena's name for them? All right, so when we think about what is and what isn't greed, sometimes you need to think about what you would do in these situations. And I hope that you would do the right thing. I do too. Do the right thing before you do things right. And as you know, from being a listener to the show here, I don't take money from just any sponsor. They've got to be aligned with GRE's mission here of financial freedom over debt freedom and prioritize ideals like cash flow and the prudent use of leverage and providing good housing for others. And most of my income, it does not come from the sponsorship of this show, not even close, so therefore I can be selective. But what if that were one's primary income source? Then in that case, you could begin to understand how that person would be less selective. And could that degrade into greed? Now, when it comes to wealth, poverty, and greed, well, first, think through the prism of redistributions of wealth. Redistributions of wealth. And in just a minute here, this is going to lead us to the greatest quote about greed that you have ever heard in your entire life. I can almost guarantee that. How about something like college student loan forgiveness, which, depending on the borrower's status, is up to either $10,000 or $20,000 of forgiveness? Just write it off. And it looked like that was going to go through, and then it got held up in the courts. Well, what about those that decided not to go to college because those people didn't want that debt? But now, if every American effectively gets taxed at a higher rate in order to pay for student loan forgiveness for those that did go and get student loans, well, then the people that decided not to go to college in order to avoid the debt, those people have to pay for the others that did decide to go to college and take on the debt. And now, as you hold on to that thought, as you think about that, here it is. Here is what American economist and academic Thomas Sowell said about greed. Sowell said, I have never understood why it is greed to want to keep the money you have earned, but not greed to want to take somebody else's money. Yeah, gosh, that's good. And the first time I heard that quote years ago, I found it remarkably thought-provoking. So therefore, you can at least ask the question, just simply posit the question, is it greed for someone to expect student loan forgiveness? Well, international man Doug Casey is waiting in the wings here. Later on the show, he and I are going to volley this eat the rich topic back and forth and talk about greed. And by the way, have you ever realized that no one wants to be called rich and no one wants to be called poor? If you call someone rich, they get a little uncomfortable with that, and they like to spurn what you just said, even if they are rich. And then if you call someone poor, oh, that's seen as a pejorative term, and that's deemed as being quite hurtful. So no one wants to be known as rich or poor. Everyone wants to be known as middle class. No one wants to be called rich or poor. But almost anyone would rather have more money than less money. The song says, mo money, mo problems, but I think most people would accept $10 million if you offered it to them right now. They'd be like, yeah, I'll try living with that problem. Well, when Doug comes on with me shortly, I'll tell you about my cathartic experience with Are Wealthy People Greedy, and how my turning point was about that light bulb moment with regard to the word opportunity. And virtually all 8 billion people on this earth have the opportunity to make their life better. If you're listening to me now, you almost surely do. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that some people have more opportunities than others do. The United States is one world nation with more robust opportunities than average. And look, if you were born in the United States, or even if you emigrated to the US, globally, you won the opportunity lottery. Yeah, that's because the US only has 4% of the world's population. It's not much of a different opportunity that you have in Canada, which has less than 1% of the world's population. Then within the US, I won what I call the parent lottery. And no, it's not because I was born wealthy. I was not even close. It's because I was born to 2 parents that provided a stable home. They were married and committed to each other before they had me, and they nurtured the environment where I could thrive and fail and succeed and learn and not have to deal with dysfunction of any kind. And I am really grateful for that. Now, what about real estate investors today? Do you deserve to prosper? Think about how you have made time to listen to this show for years because you care about your future. And your future is worth caring about because you're going to spend the rest of your life there. Then you establish good credit in order to get a mortgage loan. And then you took on the risk of repaying a mortgage loan. And then you took on property owner risk during times like COVID and inflation and a possible recession, all to do good, and also you could provide housing for others. So do you deserve to prosper and build wealth for doing all of that for others? You're even doing that for strangers. And hey, if you did, you overcame many people's almost inherent laziness. You decided to do more. You got up early. You worked hard at times. You took risk. How about you did some uncomfortable things? Maybe you confronted your property manager, or you confronted your tenant because they're not supposed to have pets and they hit a dog on you or something. If you learned how to make the world a better place and you helped others, is that greed for you to prosper? No, it's not. Not at all. Our guest, prolific author and thought influencer, international man Doug Casey, I saw in an article where he quoted his contemporary Rick Rule. Rule said, "Eat the rich, prepare to starve." That gives you a clue as to where Doug Casey is coming from. That's straight ahead. I'm Keith Weinhold. There will only ever be one at GRE episode 429, and you're listening to it. If you're looking to grow your passive income from real estate, pay attention. My Property Stats is a deal analysis tool developed by an active investor to cut the time it takes to analyze any deal by over 90%. For any real estate class, you can calculate the exact price to pay to hit your cash flow and IRR goals. Build a world-class pro forma. Calculate the most you should pay for a renovation. Run multiple scenarios with a comparison tool and more. My Property Stats is the all-in-one toolkit for real estate investors. That means more deals, more cash flow, and more returns. Go to mypropertystats.com/GRE now and use the coupon code GRE to get 10% off your first year. That's just $90 a year for a tool that can save 10 hours per deal. No more spreadsheets, no more juggling multiple files. Use coupon code GRE to get 10% off at mypropertystats.com/GRE. Knowing the difference between a turnkey provider and a vertically integrated rental property company can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of your investment. Some companies sell you a property they don't own, renovate it with contractors they don't control, refer you to a property management company they don't manage, all in multiple markets because they can't source enough inventory. That's why truly passive investors work with our friends at JWB Real Estate Capital, perhaps the country's only vertically integrated rental property investment company. They operate in one market, Jacksonville, Florida, and their whole job is to make investing in rental properties easy for you. In fact, because of their vertically integrated approach, their clients have gained 79% more home price appreciation than the overall Jacksonville market since 2013. Find out more about why it pays to invest with JWB. Call them at 904-677-6777 or go to jwbrealestate.com/GRE. GRE listeners can't stop talking about their service from Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They've provided our tribe with more loans than anyone. They're truly a top lender for beginners and veterans. It's where I go to get my own loans for single-family rental property up to 4plexes. So start your pre-qualification and you can chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even deliver your custom plan for growing your real estate portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
This week's guest is the founder of InternationalMan.com. He's the author of the High Ground series of novels. He also authored multiple New York Times bestselling books, including Crisis Investing. That actually was at #1 for 29 weeks. He produces the YouTube show Doug Casey's Take. I'd like to welcome back to GRE, the International Man himself, Doug Casey.
Thanks, Keith. It's nice to be back here.
Doug, I know you have a lot of thoughts about this eat the rich sentiment. I don't know whether it's growing or not, but it sure is pervasive. I've got to admit, back when I was a fresh college graduate a few years ago, I seemed to resent the rich. You know, I probably would have agreed with the sentiment that, well, everyone just ought to be equal and it would be a very nice world if we all just shared. Doug, I think maybe one reason I thought that is because at the time, as a fresh college graduate, I probably perceived wealth as something that was unobtainable. So I didn't truly believe in upward mobility. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And a lot of people never grow out of it. And they really harbor these feelings of jealousy or resentment. What are your thoughts?
First of all, I wouldn't have gone to college if I were you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have gone to college if I were me. When I went to college, relatively few people went to college, quite frankly. Now almost everybody goes to college. And the nature of schooling in this country has changed so that it seems that it's been captured by wokeists, neo-Marxists, socialists, people like that, that inculcate into people overtly and subtly the ideas that wealth is bad. If you have wealth, you've probably stolen it. And that's why everybody feels, or a lot of people feel, like they ought to eat the rich. What direction can we go from here? One piece of advice that I'd give to all your listeners and viewers is if you're thinking of sending your kid to college or university, don't. It's a misallocation of a huge amount of money and 4 very, very valuable years of time, which could be spent productively, as opposed to imbibing socialist-style ideas and otherwise just chasing girls and drinking. So I guess that's the way to get the show started, isn't it?
It's really unusual that oftentimes it's a 17-year-old that makes this 4 to 5 year decision about their life. And yeah, when I graduated high school, it really wasn't a question of, Keith, will you go to college? It was more of a question of, well, of course you're going to college. Where are you going to college? But, you know, I really think we've reached peak college. Statistics that I see show that college enrollment peaked in the year 2012, and it's been in a slow decline since then.
Oh, exactly. I mean, look, when I run a business, almost everybody's got a college education today, but I'm very suspicious of those people that have thoughtlessly, because it is thoughtless, as you pointed out, you march off to college in much the way that You march off to high school after grade school, and people don't think about these are the four of the most valuable years of your life. And today, typically, depending on what kind of school you're going to, you can spend anywhere from $100,000 to $400,000 being indoctrinated, which is what it amounts to. And that money, if you employed it intelligently over those 4 years, could get you well on the way to being a millionaire, as opposed to thinking ridiculous thoughts that will tend to cement you to the bottom of society. So, I'm very, very pro-education. I'm extremely pro-reading and improving yourself. I'm not pro sitting in a classroom surrounded by other young yahoos absorbing bad habits and destructive ideas. That's the way I see most college today. Yes, it's different if you take math or engineering or medicine, things like that. But those are the exceptions.
Sure. A lot of people go to college and they don't even know what they want their major to be. Maybe it was an ill-advised decision for me, even though I knew I loved geography, declared that as a major, and took it all the way through. Maybe it still wasn't worth it. And we're talking about formal education here, Doug. And I think when it comes to eat the rich sentiment, the real pivot point for me is when I completed my formal education in college. I started taking on a self-education. And I think it was in a Robert Kiyosaki book. I read a really profound statement that I actually didn't believe the first time I read it. And that was that being wealthy is a choice. But this began to open up new thought paradigms for me. And really the way that crystallized is when I didn't have a lot of money. I just had a very middling job. When I put a 3.5% down FHA loan on an entire fourplex building, lived in one unit, rented out the other three, and read more about how to be an investor and provide good, clean, safe, affordable, functional housing for people. So really that was my pivot point. And that was my belief in upward mobility, that self-education rather than formal education.
You're absolutely right. I'm a big fan of Robert's. We've become friends over the years. Listen to what Robert Kiyosaki says, read his books. I'm also a big fan, although I don't know him, of Mike Rowe, who emphasizes the value of actually doing things and making things with your hands. I think he would echo our sentiments. Talking about college, it's a misallocation, more often a waste of several $100,000 of money and 4 years of time while you're picking up bad habits. So I'm sorry I went off on that tangent on what you first said, but I felt it's important and something that people don't talk about enough today.
Well, college grooms us to be what are thought of as productive citizens in society, perhaps. And once we do get out of college and we have one of our first jobs and we're making money, we're usually paying income tax. And there's a really popular thing that you hear along with this eat the rich sentiment. And that is that oftentimes when it comes to taxes, people like to say the wealthy should pay their fair share. That's something that you hear an awful lot. I hear that a lot, but I have no idea what fair share really means. So what are your thoughts around a statement like that? I really think that's part of the statement where people resent the rich again.
Well, hold on to your wallet whenever anybody uses the word fair.
Right.
It's like when two wolves and a sheep sit down to have dinner and decide what to eat. That's what fair usually leads you to. As far as the income tax is concerned, it's become part of the cosmic firmament as far as most Americans are concerned. I don't think most Americans realize that the income tax did not exist before 1913.
Right.
And the country got on marvelously well. Economic growth was much more solid, even without the benefit of the high technology that we have today that should have greatly accelerated economic growth. But in the last 20, 30 years, in fact, over the last 50 years, the standard of living, notwithstanding the wonderful breakthroughs that have been made in science and technology, the standard of living of the average American has been stagnant and now is declining, being held up only by huge amounts of debt that the average guy is taking on to finance his house, to finance his car, to finance his education. This is going to end very, very badly. And it's creating a lot of resentment in the society. People are looking for somebody to blame. And they see that there are a class of people that are making huge amounts of money, mostly the financial class, frankly. A lot of it is stolen money, indirectly stolen money. I hate to say something like that as a laissez-faire capitalist, not a Republican capitalist, a laissez-faire capitalist. A lot of that money has been indirectly stolen because the Federal Reserve, which prints money by the trillions and injects it into society, that money usually goes into the hands of a certain political class, a certain financial class. That's why the rich have been getting richer, while the average guy has been going nowhere or going downhill over the last 50 years, especially since the currency was totally divorced from gold, which limited the amount of dollars which could be created. So, yeah, people do feel like it's time to eat the rich. And in some ways, they're right, because the rich, many of the rich, have not gotten that way by working and producing and saving and prudent investing. They've gotten that way by political means.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a difference in how one obtains their wealth. Are they actually helping others throughout society, or are they getting wealth in a different way or a nefarious way? Take, for example, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. I see wealth creators like him as advancing global prosperity. He and Bezos's ideas have made everyone a bit richer. He took on real risk and embraced ingenuity to help pioneer the ease of you having a phone in your pocket, being able to pull out your phone, touch on the Amazon app, and having all kinds of household goods just be able to show up right on your porch, from a frying pan to electronics to protein powder. So he kind of makes everyone else a bit richer with how he obtained wealth. I don't think that sort of wealth should be resented.
Oh, absolutely not. And I'm all for Elon Musk, who is a singular genius, having, whether you like electric cars or not, we can have a whole discussion about their advantages and disadvantages. It takes a genius to shepherd something like Tesla through from beginning to end. Forget about his SpaceX, totally different thing. Forget about his Boring Company and so forth. I mean, people like that advance civilization and increase the standard of living of all of us. But the people that get elected to Congress and all they can do is tax and regulate. These are destructive things that decrease the standard of living of the average person and bedevil us and make it harder to start a business, to create more wealth with all these laws and so forth.
We talked about the income tax, something that really didn't even exist until just over 100 years ago. I believe it was signed into law in 1913. 1914 was the first year that the income tax was instituted. And the vast majority of Americans only paid an income tax rate of 1% when the income tax was instituted. In fact, on an inflation-adjusted basis, today your income would have to exceed $500K per year to have paid more than 1% income tax back when it was instituted in 1914. And of course, today we have marginal income tax rates between 10% and 37%. Right there is potential evidence that we've moved more from an individualist state to a collective state. Do you have any more thoughts on the wealthy paying their fair share as it intersects with taxes? Is the flat tax an answer?
Well, the fact of the matter is, let me start out by saying that it's actually worse than you described, Keith, because you're not counting the Social Security tax, which amounts to, from $1, 13.5% non-tax deductible dollars, which go off to Social Security. So that's off the top before we even talk about income tax. But, Social Security, it turns out, is about the only tax that the bottom half of American society pays.
Right.
Because it turns out that the rich people, or people that earn over $35,000, $40,000 a year, I guess that classifies as rich today.
Globally.
They pay all the taxes. So the people at the bottom of society aren't paying any taxes at all, except to Social Security, which I've got to say is a scam. We can discuss that. That'll shock a lot of people. A lot of people won't want to hear it, especially those that are collecting Social Security, which is not an insurance program. It's actually a welfare program. It's not actuarially sound, never was, but different subject.
Tell us more about that. Tell us why Social Security is a scam, because that's existed since the 1930s when FDR set it into law. And when it's been around for 90 years, nearly like that, people just sort of get used to it or conditioned to having Social Security income.
Well, yes, FDR started it as a supposed benefit. It seemed like a free benefit, I suppose, at the bottom of the last depression. The idea was to give people in retirement a base income that would keep them out of dire poverty. That was the idea behind it. If you're going to have a Social Security program, and I would argue from an ethical point of view, you shouldn't have one because it's coercive. I mean, you have to pay Social Security. If you don't pay it, you'll go to jail. But a proper Social Security program would be one where you put money in your own individual retirement account, and it's invested in stocks and would grow with the economy. But Social Security, the proceeds, the money you put into Social Security, isn't invested in real assets. It's invested in government debt. Well, people say, well, that's safe and secure. Well, it's government debt, and government debt has to be paid off at some time. What you think is your asset is actually somebody else's liability. And apart from that, the Social Security system is entirely bankrupt. I mean, in the years to come, we'll find that young Chicanos in Los Angeles are very uninterested in paying 20% of their income, which is where it's going to have to go, to subsidize the retirement of old broads in Massachusetts, which is it's a redistribution scam. It's not a retirement program at all. I don't know if I've been clear enough in stating that, but look, there are so many distortions and misallocations of capital that have been created in the U.S. over the decades that at some point they're all going to have to be unwound. And the $31 trillion of debt that the U.S. government owes to some people, I don't see how it can ever be paid. That's approximately, it's an unbelievable sum that can never be paid. And that's only the disclosed debt of the U.S. government. We're not talking about the off-the-books debt, which would include Social Security, incidentally, and Medicare and Medicaid. So at this point, the U.S. government is completely and totally bankrupt. It's like Wile E. Coyote that's walked off a cliff, but doesn't really realize it yet. And I'm afraid that in the next few years, Wiley is going to hit the bottom of the canyon, and it's going to result in all kinds of unpleasantness and inconvenience here in the U.S., maybe even chaos. Well, that's all the bad news. I think we're going to be living in very rough times in the over the next decade, certainly. But the good news is that individuals are still going to be able to, if you produce more than you consume and wisely set aside the difference, it's still possible to grow rich in the United States, actually more than almost any other country in the world. I mean, what I'm saying sounds like, well, if you don't like America, where's a better place? And the fact of the matter is, if you want to make money, the United States is still among the best, or perhaps even the best country in the world to make money, despite all these things I'm talking about.
Yes, perhaps from that perspective, the United States is one of the least worst places for upward mobility. For example, as real estate investors, perhaps sometimes we're resented because some of the tax incentives that we take advantage of can be perceived as loopholes by those that don't understand them. For example, we talk on this show that one advantage of being a real estate investor is that you can endlessly defer your capital gains tax until the day that you die with something called a 1031 exchange. So if someone gets self-educated about this and then goes ahead and does those things, well, the government incentivizes real estate investors for doing that, providing housing that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional. It's not always easy being a landlord. So these sorts of things are incentives to get people to produce, and therefore they build wealth for themselves ethically.
Yeah, they'd have a lot more capital to build wealth with if there wasn't an income tax to start with. that's a completely academic discussion because the income tax is not going away. So as long as the income tax is there, you owe it to yourself to minimize the amount of money that you give to the government as much as possible. So I'm all for 1031s from that point of view.
Sure. I mean, some have added up all the taxes Americans pay. I brought up the income tax. You talked about a few other taxes. There's sales tax. There's property tax. Oftentimes, 80 cents on one's dollar that they earn is taxed away when you layer all these taxes on top of each other, both federal and state. Well, Doug, thanks for sharing your thoughts today. Would you let our audience know how they can learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. They can go to my podcast, which is Doug Casey's Take on YouTube. Or they can go to my free blog, which is actually quite good, I think, internationalman.com. And I also urge them to go on Amazon and read my novels, which there are a lot of things that you can say in the form of fiction that you best not say in the form of nonfiction. And those novels are Speculator, Drug Lord, Assassin, and then others are coming in the series as we trace our hero, Charles Knight.
All right, well, a lot of great resources there. This has been really enlightening. Doug Casey, thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
It's a pleasure, Keith.
Yeah, like Doug said, it's about doing things and making things. I'll tell you, when I bought my first ever piece of real estate, which was that blue fourplex for $295,000, I felt like I was taking on real risk. I made an $11,000 payment for down payment and closing costs. I borrowed the other 96.5%. I had to pay that loan back. I had to learn how to manage the other 3 tenants because I lived in one unit and rented out the other 3. And I had to pay property tax and insurance and repairs and all the other expenses. And I was still working a full-time day job when I bought that building. And on top of that, not being a handyman at all, I just don't innately have those skills. My friend Chris came over whenever a unit became vacant, and he showed me how to replace vinyl floor with hardwood floor to increase the tenant appeal. So I learned how to do that to attract a good tenant and get that unit filled. I had to scramble so that I could keep my occupancy high, so that I had the rent income to pay that mortgage and all of the operating expenses. That's an example of doing things and making things and leaving the world a better place for other people. And now, if everyone had to share equally, I've really got to wonder if I would have been incentivized to go do all of those things. When it comes to equal sharing and a redistribution of wealth, Doug touched on Social Security. Is Social Security a safety net? Does a decent society have an obligation to provide a social safety net? Or is that akin to UBI, Universal Basic Income? Or is Social Security different and therefore okay since that's for people in their later years? And then what about the pros and cons of UBI itself? That's probably a discussion for another day, maybe when we have Tom Wheelwright back. He might like to discuss that. Well, I like to answer questions head on. Are rich people greedy? No more or less than anyone else. After college, it was informal education that led to my catharsis and exorcism of the faulty belief that rich people must be greedy by nature. And now that is what I do. I help others build durable wealth ethically. So over the holidays, I invite you to engage with my resources for free. GetRichEducation.com is where you can read my written articles on both our platform here at GRE, and you'll also find my Forbes articles there. And that's also where you'll find my free course and videos and all of our podcast show notes and more all over there at GetRichEducation.com. That's where you learn. Both there and our Get Rich Education YouTube channel. All of our YouTube videos feature me directly instructing you for free one-on-one, and that content is usually different content than what you're listening to right now. You'll have your own personal epiphanies, and you'll experience a paradigm shift, including how I explain things like getting your money to work for you does not build wealth, and that debt-free is actually not where you want to be, yes, there is a certain contrarian element, no doubt, which makes sense when you realize that you want an outcome that most others won't have. So over the holidays and into next year and beyond, learn more from me free at GetRichEducation.com and go to our Get Rich Education YouTube channel. I'll talk to you next week, which is also next year, so have a happy new year. I'm Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.